Hello, friends, and welcome to Weekly Witness, Texas Impact's weekly podcast designed to help mainstream Texans of faith understand the legislative process and help you engage with public policy in the great state of Texas. My name is Scott Atnip, your host and Texas Impact's Director of Public Witness. And y'all, we are recording on Friday, May 30th, just days before the Texas Legislature adjourns Sine Die. So we're going to talk about the last week and offer some reflections on the legislative session and the waning hours as we start to look forward to the interim. And here with us for the conversation again this week is Texas Impact's Executive Director, B. Moorhead. B, thanks for joining us again today, joining us again this week. There are hours left. How are you feeling?
I'm like everybody else, tired, running on fumes, ready for it to be over. I do want to point out, for people who are mostly working on the legislative session at this point, it is almost over and everybody's tired. But out in the world, we have, graduations, which of course are, the end of something, but also the beginning of a thing. And more importantly for us, it is what we refer to as judicatory season. So we have a lot of different denominational bodies that are having their annual meetings right now. In fact, Kat's in Houston at one today, and you just were at one, and next week is another one. Those are all moments of celebration and planning and getting ready for the next big thing. So it's kind of a fun juxtaposition for me always to think about. Just as the legislature's ending, the focus for us turns back to our membership.
Yeah, I did have a chance to spend 4 days with United Methodists in Houston this last week. And I will say it was maybe a record number of people coming up and asking me detailed questions about what the legislature was doing. We recorded a Marching Orders Monday while I was there, and several of the people who were usually on that were telling me they couldn't make it, but they would watch the recording. And so it was good to be out with our members in their judicatory sessions. And I know there's a lot of that going on over the course of the next few weeks. Y'all find each other, be nice to each other, hang out and, be in community with each other while you talk about how this session ended. It's definitely a time. And so, on that note, I was in Houston on deadline nights this week. I know Tuesday was a big deadline where the House had to pass Senate bills by midnight on Tuesday. I did stay up until midnight. I had to wake up at 5:30 the next morning, so I didn't stay for all of the fun that happened after midnight that we're going to talk about here shortly. But it was a big week. A lot of deadlines, relatively quiet deadline night on the House side. Any reflections from that deadline in particular?
Well, the biggest thing I would say compared to some other sessions, although certainly not all, sometimes it is kind of anticlimactic. But this year, the big bills that everybody was wound up about, the voucher bill, the some of the other high-profile bills had already passed, and they were pretty disciplined, I would say, about not loading up all of the very most controversial stuff for the very last day. So there was definitely controversial stuff on the calendar for the last day, and there's controversial stuff that didn't make it, but not anything like 1 year there was a bill that had to do, I think, with Sharia law, so it was a religious freedom bill, and the question was, were they going to get to it on the calendar? And that was a big thing, and that didn't really happen this time. So on the House side, it was a little bit more measured than it sometimes is. On the Senate side, though, there's the Senate doesn't have nearly as many hard and fast deadlines as the House, but there are a few that are constitutionally set. And it takes a 4/5 majority to override the constitutional deadlines. And one of those, it was not on Tuesday night, the same night, it was actually on Wednesday night. The Senate hit a procedural deadline, and due to a kind of a procedural gaffe or a parliamentary error, they messed up how they did their adjournment and reconvening and killed a bunch of bills, including the library bill, which, for us, that was, gee, sure, sorry to see that bill that we opposed go, but so that was an interesting reminder that it's a big deal to keep up with all of the actual parliamentary processes and make the process work. And a lot of times it's not high stakes. Like during the legislative session, we a lot of times hear the speaker will say, back up, members, back up. I did that wrong. Let me say it again. But at the very end, it does get to be high stakes.
Yeah, say more about the library bill, because I don't think that's something we've talked a lot about. And when you say library bill, that sounds like it might be fun. But what was this one in particular?
This one was about preventing school libraries from having inappropriate materials, and it was basically a conservative anti-free speech bill, is what people would say about it.
Speaking of process and deadlines and all the things, I mentioned I did go to midnight on Tuesday night, and I think I woke up the next morning with a whole bunch of messages in our staff messaging app about another procedural issue on the Senate side.
Man, oh man. So, just another reminder that at the very end, you don't want to leave the concert before the house lights come up, or you might miss the amazing encore. So we watched the house, and there was somebody played mariachi music on their phone. That was hilarious. Everybody's all happy, clappy, and leaving. And I thought, all right, well, I'm going to go ahead and go to bed. But I checked my phone one more time, just in time to see the hero of the hour, Davey, saying, hey, House Bill 229 is up in the Senate. So I got back up resentfully and turned everything back on. And the Senate was doing the bill that would define the terms male and female and require that someone's biological sex was that's on their birth certificate be for all time and all of that stuff. And the first thing that happened was the author of the bill laid it out, and there was a colloquy with Senator Menendez. It was he did a great job. But then Senator Molly Cook spent 25 minutes in a colloquy or 23 minutes with the bill author. And the way that it happened was that in the Senate, as you know, what they moved is to suspend the regular order of business to take up and consider their bill. And so the vote is on the motion to suspend the regular order of business. And so what the questions from the other senators are supposed to be is related to things about the bill that would make them decide if they want to take up and consider that bill. And it's all, pretty scripted, and, there's not really a question about whether they're going to take it up or not. But Senator Cook used that time to ask questions that, I would argue would have been meaningful for someone to consider whether or not they wanted to take up and consider the bill if everybody didn't already have their mind made up. But at the end of the colloquy between Senator Cook and Senator Middleton, Senator Nathan Johnson said, I'd like to move the motion that we're all so familiar with, like we can recite it from heart, right? I'd like to move that the comments between Senator Cook and Senator Middleton be reduced to writing and placed in the journal. Or as the longtime legislators say, so Senator West will say, and lately we've heard Representative John Bryant will say this too, and I just think it is extra classy when they say it. They say, I'd like to move that the remarks be reduced to writing and spread upon the journal. It feels like they're talking about, I don't know, honey butter or something. But So Senator Johnson said, "We want to reduce the comments to writing and put them in the journal." And the lieutenant governor said, well, that would take a lot of work. I mean, and at that moment, I think probably everybody was like, I'm sorry, wait, what?
Yeah, you've heard this hundreds, if not thousands of times, right?
Thousands of times. And there is not ever, I have never, ever, ever heard anyone say, we shouldn't do that. I mean, it doesn't mean anything except that you'll be able to read it in writing as well as listen to the recording, right?
Which is what Senator West said, right? I guess you're
right. And so Senator West said in the 32 years that he's been in the legislature, he's never been asked to vote on a motion to place something in the journal. Well, because that's so, and because the lieutenant governor kind of made a big deal about it, like, it's going to be hard for our hardworking Senate clerks. It's going to take a long time. We should let the body vote on a motion like this. Senator Cook was asking questions that don't really belong in that part of the debate, so it wouldn't be right. All of that stuff made it seem like, well, why do you not want it in the journal? I mean, all you have to do is say, okay, and then later say, well, of course it's taking a long time. It made it seem like the lieutenant governor had a reason for not wanting that colloquy to be in writing in the journal, which would be, that would be surprising for any elected official to say, I don't want the thing we just did to be visible to the public. We know that a lot of times they hope it's not, but to say out loud, I specifically want it not to be visible to the public, that's surprising. So, and I mean, I do, like, in fairness, what I will say is at the end of the session, everyone gets frayed. Everybody is thinking real hard about every extra task they assign anybody, all of those things. So it's not unfair to say don't expect to see it in the journal right away. This is not reducing stuff to writing that is available as a recording is not going to be our first priority when we have so many other things to do. Sure, all of that. But saying that the Senate maybe should vote on that motion was really surprising.
Yeah, it was
Fortunately,
crazy. And you don't have to wait for the journal to come out to see all of that.
You don't, as it turns out, because their Texas Impact uses a service called rev.com where we routinely get transcripts of all kinds of stuff. Usually we don't transcribe the stuff that happens in the Capitol because that's not really our thing. It's not our responsibility to pay to transcribe stuff that's going to end up in the journal anyway. We usually use it to transcribe our own events so that we can create scripts or whatever. But in this case, as we have done a couple of times this session, we ran that whole colloquy and the subsequent discussion about whether it should be placed in the journal through that transcription. It took less than 3 hours, maybe more like 2 hours, and it cost us $61.69. So you can easily go to our website and find it, and you can look online, and we've got it on social media, and so no one needs to wait. And I would actually say we would be happy to donate that transcript to the Senate to save anybody the time if they would like.
That's really nice of you. That's very generous. Maybe
I do what I can, Scott. I do what I can.
All right. So that was certainly a moment. We also, in terms of what happened this week, where we are, want to catch folks up. Anything on reproductive health that you want to talk about? I know that was something we talked about last week.
So on reproductive health, the big bill that we were really worried about, Senate Bill 2880, did not get, so back now over in the House where they take their deadlines extremely seriously, the that bill 2880 did not get sent to calendars. It got voted out of committee in time that it could have passed on the House floor, but the report from the committee did not get sent to calendars, or it was not received in calendars, certainly, in time for the bill to get placed on the very last calendar. So that bill died, which we are not sad about. There were other bills that were similarly, Senate Bill 16, I think, did not get through the calendar. Some other ones that we were watching did not. I know, 819, Senate Bill 819, that would have caused problems for renewables. And what you'll see is articles in the major dailies in the media, and they're all going to be talking about quietly died, things that quietly died at the very end of the session. And that's how they die, is through those procedural moves. And it's usually in the House where those Senate bills are so close. And, no surprise, a lot of times what happens is the House hangs on to Senate bills that they know are priorities and controversial, and uses them for leverage to get the House bills passed and, get the Senate to do things that they want, or even to get House members to do things. House member will say, I'm on that committee and I'm not going to set your bill for the calendar, or I'm going to make sure your bill doesn't get voted out of committee unless you do this other thing that I want. So, there's brinksmanship that happens. And anytime you've got a whole lot of people standing on a brink, all it takes is for somebody to look away or have a little bit of a dizzy spell or the wind to blow and they fall off. So that's, there were several things that fell over the brink. I will say the ones that I think we would have been happy to see fall from the brink that did not were the gun violence prevention bills, or the more like the anti-gun violence prevention bills. So the bills that make gun ownership and brandishing and all of those things more relaxed rather than more regulated seem to be moving through the process still just fine. And that is surprising and sad. And it was particularly poignant that on the day that was the 3rd anniversary of the Uvalde shooting, that it was that exact day that some of those the worst of the gun violence bills were up on the House floor, and the House did this big, honoring of all those kids and teachers, and, everybody cried and all that, and then proceeded to vote for a bunch of gun violence increasing bills. It does make you wonder about who really has serious influence, mojo in the process, because you had the bills about reproductive stuff, you had the bills about the LGBT stuff, you had the bills about renewables, but the ones that did not get killed in the very last bit of procedural stuff were those gun bills.
Yeah, definitely a sad day. So let's talk about post-deadline, because those deadlines were, I believe, exactly a week before Sine Die, before the end of the legislative session. And so the final week where we currently find ourselves is the time for bills where the House and Senate passed slightly or maybe substantively different versions of the bill. Talk us through what happens when that happens. There are a couple of different choices each chamber could make, right?
Yeah, so the chambers can agree to one version. So what happens is a bill gets passed out of one chamber in a certain way, and then it gets passed out of the other chamber, and the second chamber has made changes to it. Excuse me. And so then it goes back to the first chamber, And the original author can either agree to concur in that second chamber's amendments. They'll say they made perfecting changes to the bill. We sent our bill to we passed the bill off the House floor and it went to the Senate, and they made it even better by changing that semicolon to a comma or whatever. But or they narrowed it or whatever the thing is. And sometimes they say, and I don't like the changes, but in the interests of keeping this policy issue moving or making it be that the industry doesn't suffer undue harm or whatever the thing is, I'm going to move to concur anyway. And theoretically, the House then, or whichever chamber it is, the originating chamber, could not go with that motion. Like the author could say, let's just do it. And the rest of the members could say no. But that is almost never what happens. What happens is they all say, if you're sure, that's fine. And they vote to concur. But sometimes they say, no, the author gets up. Charlie Guerin, right? Representative Guerin, who is an elder statesman and has a particular way about him, got up yesterday and said, I sent my bill over to the Senate and they made a bunch of changes to it and they're no good. They're no good, so I want to go to conference. And what that means is each chamber appoints 5 negotiators, and those 10 people negotiate, usually it's 5. They negotiate the differences and they come back with a conference committee version of the bill. And the conference version is then ultimately the 2 chambers vote again. How do we feel about the conference version? And again, they could say, never mind, we just don't like it. Now that we see the conference version, we just think we shouldn't even pass this bill at all. They could do that. They can say, and generally what would happen is they say, all right, fine. Well, I guess if those people who were tasked with negotiating the differences think it's okay with me. And, unless you're pretty invested in a bill, a lot of those changes are going to be ones that you wouldn't even notice or you wouldn't understand the implication of, which can be the big problem, right? Is a lot of people, you hear people get up on the floor and say, I'm just reading this bill for the first time as I'm now having to consider this conference committee report. They can reject it and it can die, or the conference committee can just never really get it together. So right now we're 4 days from the end. People have all kinds of stuff that they're trying to get done. They are sick of each other. They're definitely sick of the lobby. It's hard to get all these people together all the time. At one point, we had a member stand up and say, members, can the members of the committee meet at my desk in 30 seconds? So, that's the kind of the increments of time that we're talking about. It's very easy for that conference committee just not to quite pull itself together, or the members to be tired and crabby or tired and checked out and not think carefully, and the report comes back and somebody who really does care about that issue says, no way, this is a terrible idea. All of that is what kills a bill in conference, and there are a lot of bills in conference right now, and many of them are high-profile bills. So we're going to be watching for the rest of the time a lot. So people who are used to watching during the past, say, 6 weeks, they're used to kind of like when you're watching the Olympics, there's always something going on. The Olympics, you never have to sit for more than a couple of minutes before there's somebody trying to set the world record in some sport, and it's not always the same one, right? Like right now, while we're waiting for somebody to put their skates on, we're going to switch over here to somebody doing, that's what it's been like. Right now, it is more like watching paint dry, honestly. It is that you will be watching the House or the Senate all day and people are getting up and passing resolutions honoring, somebody's 18-year-old cat, or they're thanking their interns for a job well done, or, whatever the things are. And then sometimes they're just milling around, a lot of just dead air time in the Senate. And then all of a sudden, and in not a very explosive way, the speaker will say, or the lieutenant governor will say, legislator so-and-so calls up the conference committee report on a bill. And when that happens, you want to pay attention, because if that is a bill that you cared about the day it was filed, this is the time now to find out what really happened to it. And that is where we are on Senate Bill 8, the 287G bill. It's where we are on DEI stuff and some other things. So it ain't over till it's over.
Yeah, so a lot of bills still pending that for sure we'll be watching. Hope you'll have a chance to tune in and watch some paint dry, waiting for the big moments. I do want to hit a couple of bills that have gotten attention over the course of the last couple of days. Some that we talked a lot about and some we haven't talked about at all on this program or in much of Texas Impact programming. But let's start with House Bill 2 because that was finally passed, I believe, yesterday.
It was finally passed, and the House and Senate, the House had a pretty good bill. The Senate initially had proposed to make it a pretty bad bill. This is the bill that will give some amount of funding to public education. It's the first, what Representative Bernal was describing, is the first major public education funding reform bill in quite a while, since 2019. And the final version that the Senate passed took into account a lot of feedback that they got on their initial idea. It still is not the same. It's not as good as the House version was in, I think, a lot of people's views. And if you were going to watch any part of that process as it went back through the House, where the House did ultimately concur, Representative Tallarico engaged in a colloquy with the author of the bill, Representative Buckley, and they just went over the differences between the House and Senate versions and got a bunch of stuff on the record. It's not stuff that would ever be like, sometimes they get stuff on the record so it'll be the part of future legislation or a lawsuit or something like that. This was not that. This is more really and truly just so that Texas voters can once and for all hear what the differences were between the House and Senate versions. That's, I think, very helpful. And they ended up passing it. So schools do get more money. The individual impacts on each of the state's school districts are available, and we'll make sure to post links to those. We'll put that in the e-newsletter this week. So
yeah, more money. It was a big deal, but
it's more money. It's a big deal.
Not nearly enough. So we're going to have to continue the conversation.
Not nearly. Yes, exactly.
Another one that's gotten a lot of attention that we haven't talked about. I think you mentioned it last week in terms of one of the things that might stall out bills at the end of the legislative session was Senate Bill 3, the THC ban. Anything you want to add to that?
Man, I would not have guessed that Texas Impact would be saying the term THC as often as we have been this session. That is not really an issue we paid attention to. The organization doesn't have a position on any of this stuff, but that's been an interesting political issue to see evolve. The deal is there was concern that the hemp industry, the way that the hemp industry was incentivized a few years ago to grow industrial hemp, had opened loopholes that effectively decriminalized THC, what do they call it? THC laced products or things that had THC in them under certain circumstances. And that has led to the proliferation of these vape stores and gummies and things like that. So there was a desire to regulate that in one way or another. And some people thought it should be regulated by taxing it and, the way that other states that have decriminalized marijuana have done. Some people thought the way to do it was to completely get rid of it. And so the bill that passed the Senate was a ban on THC products. The bill that the House passed was totally different. It was a regulatory bill. It set up a regulatory framework, created taxes, but the bill went back to the Senate, and the Senate ended up taking all of those House ideas out of it. And so what is finally passing is a complete ban that is actually, I guess, and again, this is not my area of expertise, but it appears to be really problematic for farmers, many of whom have sowed a lot of their acreage in hemp because the state had one regulatory regime in place, and now it's going to be a different one. And they are furious. And we're seeing, the stuff on social media is blistering. So what I think is, while this is not ending up tanking the end of the legislative session, it seems like it's going to be a one of two things could happen. I suppose the governor could veto the bill, which would be one premise for calling a special session, which is something that I guess we should probably talk about. Another is that the governor can sign the bill, and then it seems like it's a pretty early out of the gate electoral issue. Some people are really mad.
Another one that I'm seeing on my social media feed that people are actually really mad about is the House passed House Bill 4, which would essentially get rid of the STAR test, and the Senate's version of that essentially replaces the STAR test with another test that is much like the STAR test. And so that's one to watch over the course of the next week. I know I've got a bunch of moms in my social media in my social media feed who are unhappy about that.
I'm sure you remember the tax test,
I
the
do.
TOS test. Renaming the test is not going to make any of those mothers happy.
Yeah.
That's right. Can I say something about things popping up in people's social media feeds?
Absolutely.
This is, I think, the perfect moment for everyone to really get clear what social media is good for. It is not that you need to have, I've already said, I don't have a particular opinion about that THC stuff, but I am seeing people who do have big feelings about it. And that is true about some other stuff too. There's a lot of bills that are industry bills or are bills about topics that Texas Impact just sort of doesn't dig into, where we don't have the capacity or the interest, we don't have the ganas to become experts. But what we're doing is watching, and we're taking note. Well, that's something that some people seem like they care about. In the future, and by the future, I don't mean in the year 2300. I mean in the next 3 to 6 months, remembering that you saw that stuff and hopefully not having said anything about it, but just having observed it and moved on, is going to serve you well, because as you start seeing who's running for office where and what their platforms are and who's getting blistered back in the district for stuff that you weren't aware they had even done, that's where that memory, that muscle memory of, oh, right. I remember. I saw that thing. Interesting. I didn't know people cared about that. I'll keep that in mind. That's really helpful because it will help you understand when someone, particularly when a legislator, an incumbent, is saying things and doing things that you think, well, I don't even see why they think this is such a big deal. You'll know, it's because there's a constituency that I am not part of, and I don't really care about their issues. But I see that this legislator has an issue with them. And to the extent that you care about that legislator, or you are wondering, I also had problems with that legislator, but not about this thing or whatever, that will help you place all of that information. It helps you create your paradigm for the next election cycle.
All right. So I'm going to land this plane here in just a second, but any closing thoughts in terms of, you mentioned special sessions, but any closing thoughts about what comes next?
Well, hopefully not a special session. And people always,
for real,
there's always a lot of hysteria about, not hysteria, but there's a lot of gossip about, maybe there will be a special session, and maybe there will, and maybe there won't. And there's not really a way for us to know, or certainly to influence whether there is or not. So regardless of whether there's a special or not, the reality is they'll have passed a lot of bills this session, and those bills all need to be implemented. So the next thing for us, and we're already moving in this direction, is to try to figure out what happened, and of all the very many things that happened this session, what are the probably relatively few of them that people need to know for their day-to-day lives? What are the things that it's important for folks to know? For the faith community, there will be some bills that pass that relate to reproductive issues, that relate to LGBT issues, that relate to housing issues for homeless people, issues that relate to food and the provision of food for vulnerable people, things like that, where people need to know that there's been a change for good or ill. And it's for both. There's stuff that's good and stuff that's bad, and you need to know all of it so you can work accordingly. That's what we'll be focused on next.
All right. So watch this space for more. Anything else before we close out today?
No, I think that's about all the news from Lake Wobegon.
All right. All right, friends, I hope you enjoyed this week's conversation. Be always grateful for you to be on the program 3 straight weeks. I think that's a record. It's been fun.
It has been fun.
And we just closed out 20 episodes of Marching Orders Monday. So I'm going to have to figure out how I'm going to get my online fix of conversations with you each week during the interim. But really appreciate you taking the time. And friends, really want to thank you all for tuning in and sharing the podcast throughout the legislative session. It has definitely been a ride, but there's more fun coming. And I'm not 100% sure of the agenda for this podcast in the coming weeks, but I would expect that we'll have a session wrap-up series, and we'll start to talk about what Texans of Faith can do during the interim. So watch this space for more quality content. Invite your friends to subscribe, leave a comment, a rating, a review, do all the things so even more people can find this podcast. And let us know if you have any ideas for content that could help resource your advocacy work. As always, you can reach out to me at scott@texasimpact.org. We'll definitely keep you posted on ways that you can get involved, and we look forward to seeing you in person in the months to come at one of the many opportunities to see the Texas Impact staff throughout the state. If you want to stay updated beyond listening to the podcast, make sure to sign up for all that Texas Impact has to offer at texasimpact.org. Make sure to check out the Action Center and sign up for all the things. You can sign up for emails or join one of our issue teams there. While you're on the website, I hope you take a moment to sign up to be a member of Texas Impact. Your membership supports this podcast and all of the work to engage Texans of faith to advocate for a more just and equitable Texas. So with that, I think it's time to close out this episode. So remember, the world needs Texans of faith active and engaged. So let's get to work.
Weekly Witness is hosted by Scott Atnet, engineered and produced by David Fasalo. Our executive producer is B. Moorhead. The opinions expressed on Weekly Witness are those of Texas Impact and our guests, and do not necessarily reflect the views of our sponsors. Weekly Witness is a product of Texas Impact, people of faith working for justice. Visit us online at texasimpact.org.